What's up, guys? Jeff with Shock Surplus here again with another install video for you. This time around, we got a 2020 Ford Ranger FX4. We're going to be taking off the factory suspension and throwing on Bilstein 6112s in the front with the Bilstein 5160s in the rear. Let's get this truck on jack stands and get to the install. All right, now that we got the truck on jack stands and we got the wheels and tires removed, first thing you're going to want to do is remove the ABS sensor wire and the brake line bracket from the spindle. To do so, you're going to use an 8mm socket and also a 10mm to get the brake line bracket removed. Once you have your brackets removed from the spindle, you're going to want to take a clip tool and unclip the clips holding on the ABS line to the upper control arm. With your ABS line removed from the upper control arm, you're going to want to take your 18mm socket and remove the sway bar links down under the frame. When you have the sway bar mount removed, next thing we're going to do is take a 21mm socket and remove the tie rod end link. It is a tapered bolt, so you're going to want to take a hammer and hit the spindle to break that mating surface. With the tie rod out of the way, we're going to go ahead and take your 18mm socket and loosen the bolt for the upper control arm to the spindle. Once you have that nut loosened, you take your sledgehammer and just like what you did with the tie rod, go ahead and hit the spindle until you break the mating surface between the ball joint and the spindle. Before completely disconnecting the upper control arm from the spindle, what I like to do is remove the shock bolts or the strut bolts first. To do so, we're going to take an 18mm socket and remove the two lower nuts on the strut. Now that you have the lower strut mount removed, we're going to go ahead and this is just on the driver's side. And so you have easier access to the back two nuts. We're going to go ahead and remove these grounding wires. On the passenger side, you have a lot more clearance because the ground wires are not in the way. But to remove these ground wires, you're going to use a 13mm socket. With those ground wires loose and kind of out of the way, take your 15mm socket and remove the three top nuts. Now that you have the three top nuts removed from the upper strut mount, we're going to go ahead and completely disconnect the upper control arm from the spindle. When you do that, you want to make sure you have some type of safety wire so that you could secure the spindle out of place, and that way spindle doesn't come out too far on you. All right, so we're actually gonna put the thread one of the nuts on top of the strut mount, just because we were unable to get the lower control arm to drop out far enough to be able to bring out the upper mount out. So we're gonna thread on one of the top nuts for the strut. And once we have that threaded on, we're going to go ahead and push down on the lower control arm. And we could then loosen that top nut to be able to get that strut fully out of the truck. With the strut out of the truck, I'm ready to throw this into the spring compressor and swap over the top mount onto your new 6112s. All right, now that you got your strut assemblies put together, we're gonna go ahead and slide the upper mount into place first. Once you have your upper mount in place, you take your factory nuts and loosely thread that on there. You take your new lower bolts. I like to thread these on first just so that I can make sure the lower control arm is in line. Once you have your mounts kind of loosely in place, you can take your jack and jack up the lower control arm so that you could get the bar pins in line with the lower control arm. Then it'll be easier to slide those bolts through. With at least one of the lower mount bolts slid through the lower control arm, you want to kind of just snug up that bolt just so that you could get that nut threaded on there, so that when you release tension on the jack, that lower control arm doesn't drop out and the bolts come out. From here, take your 15mm socket and snug up the upper strut mount bolts. With your top nuts and your lower mount in place, we go ahead and take your spindle and your upper control arm. And it may help to get some help and have a buddy press down on the upper control arm while you get the nut started on the ball joint. Can you press down on that? Now, once you have your spindle connected to your upper control arm and that bolt threaded on there, you're gonna want to take a 8mm socket and an 18mm wrench. You're gonna use that socket to hold onto this ball joint to make sure that the ball joint doesn't spin while you're tightening the top nut. With your spindle torqued down to your upper control arm, we're going to go ahead and connect your tie rod to the spindle. Before doing that, you want to make sure your ABS sensors are not caught anywhere where they shouldn't be. Make sure that they're not caught behind the tie rod. And take your spindle and slide your tie rod into your spindle. Take your 21mm nut. Once you have the tie rod in place, we're going to go ahead and connect the ABS line bracket and the brake line bracket to the spindle. From here, you're gonna wanna make sure you put your clips back into your upper control arm. Reconnect your ground cables. Once you've got everything there tightened up, we're gonna go and connect the sway bar link, or the sway bar, back to the frame, and then torque down the lower strut mount bolts. All right, now that we got the wheels and tires back on the truck, it's time to move to the back. All right, guys, now we're at the back of the truck. We're gonna be doing the rear shocks. Rear shocks are super simple. Not even gonna take the wheels and tires off. All we're gonna do is we're gonna jack the truck up, put the truck on jack stands so that we're not having to compress the shock too much when we're putting in the new shocks. The only tool that you're gonna need for this is gonna be an 18mm socket. All right, so we're under the truck. Pretty simple to remove the old shocks, just two bolts holding the shocks in. All you'll need is a 15mm socket. The nuts on these are captured, so you don't need to put a wrench on the back end of this. Once you have the lower bolt off, pretty simple to find the other bolt. Just follow the shock straight up and you'll see the bolt that you need to remove. And you've got your shock out. To get the new shock in, you're gonna wanna clamp the reservoir to the shock with the included reservoir mount. And you're gonna want the reservoir to be oriented in this fashion, so that when the shocks are in line, the reservoir is sitting parallel with the shock. All right, with the upper bolt in place, you're gonna want to take a screwdriver or a pry bar. Sometimes it does help to use a jack. With the lower mount torqued down, you go ahead and torque down the upper mount. All right, guys, so that wraps up this install. We did the Bilstein 6112s in the front and Bilstein 5160s in the back. On the front, we went with the 2.5-inch setting. On the back, we didn't do anything on the back. That's kind of what our customer requested us to do. Right now, with the 2.5 in the front and nothing in the back, the truck is sitting pretty level, but that front end will come down a little bit once the springs settle. With that, you want to make sure you wait about 200 miles before you go and get your truck aligned. Give those springs a chance to settle and get to their resting ride height. If you guys have any questions about this setup that we did here or a setup for any of your other vehicles, give us a call or email us at sales@shocksurplus.com. Thank you.